one criticism I get a lot is my use of wording, sort of the big words. That comes up a lot in my videos, and it's a very valid criticism. So I guess this video is just a really short explanation of exactly why I use the words I use to describe the things I do. And it really boils down to that I think language and the words associated with elements of language and how they're being sort of discussed is really important. One of the things you'll oftentimes sort of come across is, well, you have to be very straightforward. Brevity is very important. You want to make sure that you are able to explain the ideas that you are talking about to the lay audience. And that is a very valid thing to note. Oftentimes, however, precision is incredibly useful when you're talking about very specific ideas or terms. Now, for instance, if you talk to me on Discord a lot, you'll notice that I very, very rarely talk about sort of shows that talk about the everyday in the context of it being slice of life, because I am very careful about exactly what constitutes not only what is slice of life, but also elements that make up slice of life. So to sort of provide an example here, I will always try to essentially say what particular element of the slice of life sort of supergenre or metonym that I think is being discussed here. So you might oftentimes see me call it sort of nichijou-kei, or I might call it iyashikei, for instance. And I think those are very important. Those distinctions are very important. This precision is essential because, for instance, we could arguably say that nichijou-kei stories have actually been sort of rose in popularity because they're responses to sort of the mid to late 90s, early to mid 2000s sort of stories, and that's essentially how they came about. But arguably, the Iyashikei themselves have had these sort of Iyashi poetic elements that have gone back as far as the 1700s, as far back as the 1600s. They themselves draw more from Japanese literature than they actually do from anime, arguably, depending on who you talk to and read to. And I think this distinction now all of a sudden becomes important because you can't really say now that slice of life, for the sake of simplification, you can't really say that slice of life has X, Y, and Z elements if it directly contradicts elements that are engendered within an element of sort of the slice of life taxonomy. And that sort of instance is why I think it's really important to be very careful with your language, even if it is sacrificing on some elements, even if you're sacrificing on some level, the sort of layman clarity, I would say, being able to reach out to a broader audience if that is the cost it is, because I think precise argumentation is important. This reminds me sort of a situation that Sent Anime Stuff had in regard to his video on Sabaibuke, which is the reason why I'm making this video, also because I've been planning on making this sort of video for the longest time. But essentially what Sent did was he made a video on Sabaibuke fiction, where he references Une Tsunohiro, who simplified it as the sort of death game. Now, a lot of people got on his case for that, primarily because they said, well, Death Note really isn't a death game. But the main argument wasn't really the fact that it was a death game, but more on the argument that it was these sort of very tight relationships have essentially disintegrated to where the only person you can now trust is yourself. And you can actually see that very clearly in Death Note. And sort of, I think that's where precise language was more useful, and that's where essentially trying to approach these ideas, these arguably complex ideas, to lay communities may fail. But I think it's very important to keep these things in mind. So when people say, well, Joe, you use big words for the sake of trying to look smart, I don't know, maybe I do, but on the conscious level, I try not to do it because of that. I try to do it because I'm constantly paranoid about how my argument is coming across to people, particularly people whom are very familiar with the subjects themselves. And so I try to be very, very careful with exactly what it is I'm saying, and words have particularities that are incredibly useful to the discussions at hand.